We all seem to be leaning to my right today. Okay, so I'll talk over here. So today we'll see if we finish up Godspell today. We have one more class after this. My plan was to get to another show by Stephen Schwartz called Children of Eden, which is not terribly well known. It actually covers the creation through the story of Adam and Eve, all the way through the story of Adam and Eve in the first act. And then the same actors do the story of Noah in the second act. And you'd like to know a little more about it. So my plan is to try to get to that some next week. We can't possibly get through all the songs of Godspell. They're just too good, and you only have 45 minutes in each class. There was no choir rehearsal this week, so I have to go attend to make sure I'm ready to sing in choir this morning. Anyway, so, we were talking about Godspell. And I got through most of the story of the creation of it last week. I wanted to say just a few more things. The show opened off Broadway in that little Cherry Street Theater. And as I said, I think it holds about 150 people. And it became one of the hottest tickets in New York. And there was an awful lot of popular culture around it. And, it was this moment when Jesus seemed to be ubiquitous in popular culture. But it also had a score that once the recording came out, the recording started selling an awful lot of copies. And that's one way to get an awful lot of people in a theater. And this was a tiny theater. That opened in May. In October, it moved to the Promenade Theater, which was in a hotel further up Broadway. It was like at 71st and Broadway. It held about 350, but that's still not big enough to be a Broadway theater. Godspell didn't actually play on Broadway until it had been open over 5 years in New York. It became a Broadway show in 1976 after opening in 1971. It actually only ran a little over a year on Broadway. Of course, I'm not sure a week has gone by since where it isn't playing somewhere in the world. I mean, it's a very, very popular show, and it remains so. And it's the story it tells. It's how it tells the story. And it's a really, really effective score. I mean, Stephen Schwartz was a very young songwriter when he wrote it, but he was a very good one and a very observant one. And what I want to sort of talk about today is how he did that. Most of the songs, again, the texts are from the Episcopal hymnal. This is a hymnal that John Tebelak, the guy who conceived Godspell at Carnegie Mellon and then took it to New York, he borrowed the hymnal from his parents' house in Cleveland and took it back to Pittsburgh. And then he gave the text to Schwartz, and Schwartz set them. So, a lot of people know other other music for these texts. So they're mostly Episcopalian hymns. The way the show opens is not very famous because it's not on the recording. It wouldn't have been put on the recording because Stephen Schwartz wanted a lot of popular hits to come out of that recording. And this song was not going to cause popular hits. It's called The Tower of Babel. And in this case, it's not B-A-B-E-L, it's B-A-B-B-L-E. And it's Tebelak getting a bunch of, 8 people he identified as philosophers speaking. And then, of course, he substitutes for that person, those people, Jesus. So Socrates sings for a while, and then Thomas Aquinas, and then Martin Luther sings for a while, and then Leonardo da Vinci. It's a very eclectic list. Edmund Gibbon comes in, Friedrich Nietzsche, Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist gentleman, and then Buckminster Fuller, which always have to be from that time to even know who they're talking about there. But anyway, they all sing together. One starts singing, and by the time you've gone through about 4 minutes, every one of them is singing. He's just using the same chord progression and writes 8 different melodies they can sing over this chord progression. So it becomes utterly chaotic. And then that stops when a shofar blows. Now, of course, a shofar, it's a horn, it's a ram's horn used in Jewish worship. And it sounds like, just a regular horn getting blown into. And that silences everything else. And then they start singing, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord." But just, you'll get an idea what that sounds like from just hearing a little bit of it.
I honor and love you, but I shall obey
This is Socrates.
rather than you. And as long as I have life, he's not supposed to use.
As it goes along, it becomes this. And finally, now you might say, I can't understand it. No, like it says, that's the whole point. It's not on the recording, because the recording much more effectively opens with the shofar call and then the beginnings of prepare ye the way of the Lord. Most of the examples we're going to look at today are from the film. But before we look at any more of the music, I want you to see one of the parables being told in Godspell. Because again, I started showing you the script last week, and if I took you through the script, anybody who's gone to church their whole life, they know this script. They've heard all of it. Now, we don't usually read it in the King James Version today, but it's basically the King James Version of the Bible, most of it from Matthew, some of it from John and Luke, and there's a few other places that get represented as well, a few other books that get represented as well. And Tibelak put together the script. But the object of this, again, is that you have these young, usually they're going to be young. It's going to be most effective with a young cast. They improvise during their rehearsals the way they're going to tell the parables. And again, they're dressed as clowns. And Jesus is also a clown. And so the way they tell them is goofy. It's a goofy show. The stories are there. One can argue that the power of the parables are still there, but they're being told for humorous effect. And you can get a pretty good idea. This is the parable of the Unforgiving Servant from the 1973 film. The film was made very early in the history of Godspell. Usually musicals, the musical runs on stage and then the film comes years later. Like Oklahoma opened in 1943 on Broadway. The film didn't come out for 12 years. For the very simple reason they hadn't sold it. And then it goes into a song. That's how the show proceeds. The parables are not told in any particular order. And the first act is entirely that. If you go to a production of this during the intermission, usually they're serving grape juice, sometimes something else to eat as a kind of informal communion. And in the second act, they start by telling parables and then they get into the crucifixion story. So of course the second act is quite a bit more serious than the first. But the most serious of parables are told with this lighthearted of a style. So it takes a little getting used to, and it's. I think it's very effective. It took me a while to figure out why it was effective. I guess I'm not a clown guy. I don't know, but anyway, that's how it proceeds. The songs usually are, the songs are treated more seriously, or certainly tend to be, although some of them have a very light touch as well. But that is how the first act proceeds, and we will get to some of the second act and some of the crucifixion scene as well. As we go through these songs, again, we don't have time to get through all. One thing I've listed is the model for them. It's really kind of fascinating when you talk to Stephen Schwartz about putting this score together. He hasn't only said it to me, he said it in many interviews. He had to write this score. He only had about a month. It literally was mostly written between about middle of March and the middle of April, or late April, in 1971. He got brought into it, and he just very, very quickly wrote all the songs. And the way he says he did it was, he looked at models. He loved Motown at the time. And so there were songs from Motown and songs by singer-songwriters of the day, like Lori Nero and any number of others that he liked. And he took things from those songs. And he talks about the models. And the thing is, if you listen to the model that he talks about, it doesn't sound like the song from Godspell. But of course, there is there's a surface similarity between a lot of music, especially popular music. If you really go through all 40 songs that are in the top 40 at any given moment, there's a lot of similarity between them. Human beings have to be convinced to listen to something new. There's an awful lot of people, they know what the music they like, and if it's not the music they like, it's not the music they want to talk about. It's not the music they want to hear. So popular music especially usually has pretty strong models, and if you hear one rock love tune, it sounds a lot like another rock love tune. if you just back up a little. Now, there's things people like about it. They like the singer style. They like the band. So they will say, oh, I like that song a whole lot better than that one. Well, they're not that different. But Schwartz, mostly when he talks about these things, what he's kind of, if you wanted to write an article about it, you might say the education of a young songwriter. Because, this was a guy who he had a great ear. He loved popular music, and he listened to songs, and he heard effects in them he really liked. I spoke to him enough. Sometimes we were around. He has a piano, of course, in his office there, and he'd say, "Oh, that song," and he'd sit down and start playing it. There was no music in front. Or say, "Wait, I can't sing it in that key this morning," and he drops it a minor third. Well, that's a musician. Most people can't. I'll just play that in another key. I know the man has a wonderful ear. But what we're kind of looking at here, as I said, is he's listening to songs around him in 1970. Well, starting, let's say 1965. The man was born in 1948. So, when the Beatles arrive, he's 14. When Motown gets going, he's about the same age, and he's already sitting down and playing everything he hears on the piano. So when the songs, like Day by Day, he says it's based on Burt Bacharach and Hal David's What the World Needs Now. Well, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. Doesn't sound a whole lot like day by day, but there were some things he liked in it. One was the fact that it's in triple meter. Modern popular music tends to be in 4. It doesn't tend to be in 3. And there was some way you use 7th chords that he liked. And he kind of built it into what he was doing. So when I say models, believe me, when I was writing this book, I sat down and listened to the models, looked at the music of them. And, again, it's an inspiration. It's not a copy job. Besides, if you do too much of a copy job, you end up in court and you end up with a jury, most of whom know nothing about music, trying to decide if that's copied or not. It's not a very effective way to do it. Everybody gets a music theorist to testify for them. It's like this, and the other one says, no, it's not. And then the jury sits there and scratches their head and says, okay, you owe me $830,000. It's not the most effective or interesting thing going on in the American legal system, in my opinion. Anyway, yeah. Everybody does it. They just don't talk about it. It's conscious. It's conscious, but again, so he's borrowing triple meter. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Depending on how fast you go, it sounds like a waltz or it sounds like something else. Triple meter is not an uncommon thing. He just heard a song that was in 3 at a time when almost all rock tunes are in 4. So that's what inspired him. It's not it doesn't make what he's writing sound like. And the big thing about Day by Day is it actually slips into 4 and becomes a rock tune. And we'll get there in just a moment. Anyway, the first song, it's a very simple song. It's just called Prepare Ye the Way of the Lord, which comes right after the shofar call. And this is in the film. There's the shofar. So these are a bunch of people in New York, all young people, who have other things to do. But somehow in their head, they just heard this call and they hear someone singing, Prepare Ye the Way of the Lord. And it inspires all of them to go run and play in a fountain in Central Park as they assemble as a community. And of course, they're all getting wet. They're being baptized. There's a lot of moments in the show where something a Christian will recognize as part of Christian ritual is they do something like it. And by the end of this scene, John the Baptist sees Jesus standing off just in his underwear because Jesus is there to be baptized. And Jesus says the lines that, he says to John in the gospel. And Jesus is baptized there, even though, John says what he's supposed to, Jesus says what he's supposed to. So, if you don't know the story, you may be learning some of the story here. If you do know the story, it's very easily recognized. And there's almost every moment in this show, a Christian's going to know exactly what's going on. Interestingly enough, Stephen Schwartz came from a secular Jewish family. I don't think they ever went to temple. certainly didn't sound like they did. And he has no real religious beliefs. He just knows a good story when he sees one, and he can write music about it. And this is the guy who has now written the score to Godspell. He also wrote the score to Children of Eden, which, as I said, tells those two stories in various acts. And he also, of course, wrote the music and the lyrics to The Prince of Egypt, which has become a really popular film and now stage show, especially the evangelical community. This guy has brought more religion to the stage than almost any other Broadway figure I can name. And he's just doing it because he knows a good story and he knows how to write music to go with it. So after this, Jesus starts singing the song, God Save the People, which doesn't really have a model. It's kind of very vague when he talks about that. But this is some of they're in Central Park, and this is some of the song, God Save the People. He's being baptized. Ethos of musical theater. As I said, when you sing, you often sing in a community. Christians know that's a great thing to do. Most anybody who goes to church that has any kind of musical tradition knows that. One way you can get people together is get them singing music together. It's a very powerful thing. And most of the songs in this show, you're talking about the assembling of community. And I mean, they've already assembled. They all got baptized in the fountain. But you see Jesus singing, you see John the Baptist singing, you see everybody else running up, and we see the community assembling yet once again, and what starts out as a solo becomes a chorus. And that only happens in musical theater 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd times. And here it's being done in a sense, again, as I said, almost any Christian is going to be able to buy into and see what's going on here. The biggest hit to emerge from the show was the song Day by Day. And it got tons of radio play back in the 70s. I mean, when they weren't playing Jesus Christ Superstar, they were playing Day by Day. And then, of course, there was that other song by Ocean, put your hand in the hand of the man, which of course was about Jesus too. And it was on radio the exact same time. It was really quite extraordinary how many religious artifacts there were going on in the music and popular culture in the top 40. And Day by Day, the meaning of the songs, besides community, the other meaning of the songs in this show is there's a solo for each person. So Jesus is one, and there's 9 others. And every one of them gets a solo. And in the show, that is supposed to be the moment when they commit themselves to Christ. I mean, they're already in the community, but when they start singing, that's the moment that character thinks, okay, now I'm really part of this and I'm really following this guy. And the first one to do it is Robin. If you look at the script, it's the name of the original 10 young actors who were in the show, who were not all in the film. The guy playing Jesus in the film, by the way, is Victor Garber, who you've seen all over films and television for the last 50 plus years. He doesn't look like that anymore, obviously. The woman who sings Day by Day, and I mean, it was her recording of it that, because it's on the original cast album that went double platinum or whatever, is Robin Lamont, who was a student at Carnegie Mellon, and her acting career after Godspell, it never really took off. When I interviewed her, she was an assistant district attorney on Long Island. A number of these people went on to do some other things, and a number of them died in the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s as well, because of course it really hit the theatrical community very, very hard. But Robin Lamont's still around. Of course, these people are 50 years older now, but she was a good singer, had a nice folksy alto. And this is the moment in the movie when she commits herself to this figure that she's now.
Master.
Again, Schwartz didn't write the text. It's from the Episcopal hymnal. And the director of the thing, I mean, this is clearly what they're buying into. They're singing together and they're doing some activity together. I mean, granted, they're just moving stuff around in a junkyard, but they are working together. And, again, Schwartz, when I was reading the foreword to the script to you, it talks about the assemblage of this community. And, I mean, there's worse things Christians can do than try to assemble a community. Anyway, it's a very big, it's a very big part of the way this show works, and it is what the songs are there for. I mean, not all of them, but okay. Another song that happens on earlier is "Learn Your Lessons Well," and this is when another character comes jumping in. Again, we don't have time to look at all of them. That one, he was interested in folk rock tunes. Folk rock, of course, was a big thing in the 1960s and early 70s. And a lot of it had to do with the urban folk revival that took place in the 50s and 60s with groups like the Weavers, and before that, the Almanac, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Simon and Garfunkel, etc. So that's kind of based on that, but that's all he really says. The song "Bless the Lord" is literally based on Lori Nero's "Save the Country." And it is one where you can hear it pretty well. It's got a shuffle feeling to it, which is kind of a New Orleans musical term. Just moving forward like shuffling feet or something. And then also, as I said, this was a young guy with a great ear, hearing things and sounds that he loved. And in this tune, he was hearing a lot of chords, but in the right hand, but the chord, the bass note that was being played wasn't in the chord, which creates a sense of dissonance and kind of a somewhat disorienting sense. And if you have a tune doing that all the way through, it has a pretty special sound. Like, the kids went crazy about this. It was just so wonderfully written in the language of the day, musical language of the day. Another thing he loved about "Save the Country" was that there was actually a change of tempo in it. He says, one thing you didn't do in popular music in the day, when you set the tempo, you kind of kept it there. And this song didn't. Well, you can find other songs where the tempo changed. So again, it's just little ideas he heard that brought it into the music. Then there's "All for the Best." And the inspiration goes back a couple of generations, because the inspiration is Irving Berlin. Irving Berlin, of course, was born in 1888. At this point, Irving Berlin was 83 years old. But there was a song in his show, "Call Me Madam." The song is called "You're Just in Love." And it's a song that Ethel Merman sang with a young man who was in the cast. And it's a counterpoint song. And by a counterpoint song, I mean one person sings one thing, and somebody else sings another thing, and then they sing it together. And this is something Berlin did with some frequency, and Schwartz just loved it. I mean, the smile that was on his face when he said, when I first heard that song, well, when he first heard that song, he was probably 6 years old. The musical came out in 53. The film might have been, 57 or 58. Maybe he was 10. But still, he just loved the notion of one singing one verse, one singing something else, and then combining it. So, the backup, the ensemble that accompanies Godspell is a rock group. I mean, it's a lead guitar, bass guitar, keyboard, and drum set. That's all you need. So here we have Irving Berlin being accompanied by a rock group. But, you can do it, especially if you use the keyboard. And, it can sound really quite... Anyway, every show the man has ever written has at least one counterpoint song in it, because he just loves the idea. And this one, the production on this in the movie was just wild. They end up in Times Square, and they're dancing in front of a large electronic sign, and you see their shapes in the sign. It's just, they shut down Times Square to do this number. Anyway, they start out at Lincoln Center. Again, nobody else is around. And of course, listen to it. We're in the ragtime world, folks. Now, by now he's Judas, and the words, which are a little hard to understand here because it's really zipping by, are very cynical. Jesus was talking about someone who's sad and has reason to be. Judas, quite a bit more world is. You've gone through the same chord progression twice, and you had Jesus sing his kind of bluesy, slower melody to it, and you had Judas singing his faster, more cynical melody to it, and now you put them together.
Yes, it's all for the best.
The film, it did okay. But when I was talking to Edgar Lansbury, who was the producer of not only the original show, but also the film, I mean, this is many years later, he says, well, what can I say? The film was just too weird. and it is weird. I mean, the star of it is obviously New York City. But New Yorkers like that. Anyway, so that's all for the best. All Good Gifts, another wonderful song. I want to get to last for you. All Good Gifts was based on Fire and Rain by James Taylor. Nothing terribly specific. He said, well, I changed the mode, which means he took it to minor where other was in, no, but one's in minor, he takes it to major. Like something about the chords, Light of the World, Gemini Child, Mamas and the Papas, which of course was a very popular group coming out of California at the time. Turn Back, Oh Man. It's a very suggestive Mae West sort of thing. Turn back, oh man, forbear thy foolish ways. And it was sung in the original version by Sonia Manzano, who went on to be Maria in Sesame Street. And she's kind of going around and rubbing her scarf on people like a sexy singer going through a club. But the tune, again, is Turn Back, Oh Man. And then there's Alas for You. This is one of the few songs in the score that Schwartz actually wrote the words for, too. Because this is the moment when Jesus is calling out the Pharisees. You vipers, you fools. And Schwartz, listening to this as a guy who was, of course, more into musical theater than John Tebelak, he said, John, Michael, that's a really, really boring speech. Let's set it to music. So he took the Bible verse and wrote his own version of it and set it to music. And the way he said it was, it's not in any straight meter. It's just shifting meters all the time. He calls it the Leonard Bernstein song in the score. This is something Bernstein just loved to do. But I mean, we're switching between 4/4, 3/8, 5/8, 7/8. If you're trying to dance to it, you better be really good, because the meter is just changing constantly. But he thought that sounded really wonderfully angry, and it does. You say you like her, and of course, you get a rock drummer going and someone who really knows how to play tambourine, and it's a piano song. Schwartz is always distinguishing between guitar songs and piano songs. He himself is not a guitarist; he's a pianist, and he sat down and wrote this at the piano. And of course, piano plays a huge role in all that musical anger as well. But what a lot of the anger is coming from is just these constantly shifting meters. 4/4, that's the march thing. You don't switch meters in 4/4 because the band will fall over. When people are waltzing, you have to stay in 3 or the dancers don't know what to do. But this one is just constantly shifting the meter. And it's one reason it feels really unbalanced to us. Again, it's just a guy with a good ear who knows what he needs to bring to these songs. There's quite a few of them. By My Side is the one song that he didn't change. This got written for the it just got written, I believe, when they got to New York, and they did it at the Experimental Theater. And Schwartz loved the melody. It's hard to imagine an artist doing this, because there's money to be made in songs, and I guarantee you the man made a fortune out of his Godspell score. But he liked this song so much that he just kept it in the score. And I was having coffee with Peggy Gordon. Again, I don't know these people well. I just interviewed them, I haven't seen them since. But Peggy Gordon, she said, I bought my apartment in New York off of what I was able to make, just on the royalties from that one song. It's a lovely song. It's gorgeous. And the harmonies were kind of put together by the cast, 2 or 3 members of the cast. But read the lyrics. I have no idea what it's about. I don't think anybody really does. It's the sad song that is sung as Jesus is removing the clown makeup from the people, which of course, if you want to put a religious significance on it, okay, you don't need to be, you're ready to go out and preach to the world yourself. You don't need me with you anymore. You're ready to, it's like Jesus saying to his apostles, you can move on now. And this is where they cease being clowns, and we're working our way up to the, no, actually, I'm sorry, that happens during On the Willows. But By My Side, it's a sad song again, sung as we're, on the way down to the crucifixion. But that's all interrupted by We Beseech Thee, which is just it's a wonderfully happy and tune. That's kind of the time we have today. I think what I want to do next week is spend a little bit of time on this moving down into the crucifixion. And then we'll talk a little bit about Children of Eden. I'll figure out something useful to say about it in 25 minutes. But again, it's a show that Schwartz and others worked on. It's not really something that can be done on Broadway. It's far too large of a cast. Needs a large chorus, needs a bunch of kids. We're talking about a cast of 50 or 60. You can't afford that on Broadway. It tends to get done by church groups and school groups and stuff, but it gets done a lot. Yeah. That wasn't his idea. That was John Michael Tebelak. The guy who actually put the show together first. He was the one who decided the same character would be Judas and John the Baptist. And I'm not sure there's only 10 of them. There's only 5 men, and one had to be Jesus. So they wanted, and one reason they liked it was, he did talk about it. One reason they liked it was because here's John the Baptist, who is close to Jesus, and Judas, of course, was also close to Jesus. So they just wanted one character to be this person so they could recognize it as the other member of the cast who was Jesus' best friend. And like they sing the "It's All for the Best" together. They seem very much in a camaraderie there. It was an intentional thing to do, partly for casting reasons, but partly also, okay, this is his best friend, and he plays these other 2 characters.
It does seem very symbolic.
Yeah.
God and
Yeah, you can look at it from a religious sense in a very interesting way. You can't through most of this show. Tebelak had very strong religious intentions in it. Schwartz didn't share them. Schwartz just wanted to turn it into a great show, which through the score and the musical staging and everything, they certainly did. Any other questions? Okay, well, we'll do this.